Hello everyone, Linda here from Just for Tummies. Welcome to today's video, Is Food Making You Ill? So whether you're watching this video on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, welcome. You may be watching it on catch up later. You will be able to watch the video on all of those channels at a later date, and we will be sending it out in a newsletter in about a week, 10 days, if you do subscribe to the Just for Tummies newsletters. So I'm very pleased to have my guest today, and it's someone that maybe some of you will be familiar with, Jane Barret, nutritional therapist. We've had Jane on our videos a few times. And for those of you who are members of my Tummy Talk Facebook community, you will know that Jane is a member there too. So without further ado, I am going to invite Jane into the video. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Linda.
Well, did you have a good holiday?
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Really nice. Yeah.
It was a golfing holiday.
Yeah, it was.
And I just want to say a very happy wedding anniversary.
Oh, thank you.
It's today, isn't it?
Yeah, 31 years.
Why are you working today?
We're both working today. It's fine. We've just come back from a holiday, so we sort of celebrated it there.
Oh, yes. Wonderful. Well, congratulations, Jane. 31 years.
31, yeah.
Wow.
Impressive,
Well, Jane, we've got a lot to get through in this hour, and it's a huge subject, isn't it? You know, food additives and ultra high processed food, Frankenstein fake food. So we've got an hour, so we need to keep quite tight, don't we, to the agenda. So I've got a list of questions that I'd like to ask you. Oh, one thing I just want to say to people who are watching, if you've got any questions, do please ask. Type below this video. We may not get around to answering it during the video, but we will certainly answer it afterwards. So Jane, the first one is yes, can you briefly explain what the traffic light system is on labels?
Yeah, so the traffic light system really is a way of measuring fat, salt and sugar specifically, and it's a green, amber, red. So green means that it's low in the nutrients stated, so that it's classed as reasonably healthy. Amber is classed as moderate in the nutrient stated, so that you can eat most of the time. But it's the red one that is the more concerning, which is where it's high in the nutrient stated, so fat, salt or sugar, and to keep that reasonably low. I've got an example here on a packet of nuts. So you can see the red, green and amber all together in that packet of nuts.
Yes, and Jane, I can't. I mean, I can see the colours, but I can't read the text. So the red, there was just seemed to be one ingredient under the red. Is that the fat content of the
Yes,
nut?
so actually on this is just a pack of hazelnuts, and actually the red at the top is the fat content, but the amber that you can see further down is when it's broken down into saturated fat, because it's actually moderate in saturated fat because it's in healthy fats.
Yes.
And then it's green in the sugar and the salt, because that's obviously very low in there. Yeah. So that's quite a good example. But obviously nuts were super healthy food. But where we're mostly looking at these traffic lights is really on processed sort of ready meals.
I've got these, Jane, and I tend to snack on these throughout the day. And I've got walnuts and I've got almonds here. And I know it's a bit naughty, Jane, but what I do, I put them on a baking tray and I sprinkle them with Himalayan salt, and I just pop them in the oven on a low, on a low setting, just for 10 minutes, and it just increases the flavour. I know that's a bit naughty, but it's not too bad, is it? It's not like I'm eating lots of them every day.
No, that's fine.
Okay, great. So let's move on to ultra high processed foods, because to me it is a relatively new phrase. So does it replace junk food and processed food? And if not, what makes ultra high processed food different?
Yeah, it's basically just a new term for junk food. It's been coined by Brazilian researchers that found a link between ultra high processed food and cancer. So if you think of processed food on a spectrum, so we've had processed food for centuries with pickling and salting and curing,
Yeah.
etc., freezing. So we've had that for centuries. That's very low processed food. But then you've got now, which is much more prevalent, which is the addition of lots of additives. And that's now been reclassed effectively as ultra high processed foods. And what helps to explain that spectrum is the NOVA system. This is a new classification system
The
coined
NOVA system. The NOVA system.
the NOVA system, yes.
NOVA. I think we're coming on to that later. That's one of my questions to you later. Yes.
Yeah, so the NOVA system is developed by the same team that coined the new phrase ultra processed foods. And it's effectively trying to just differentiate between lightly processed foods, which can be healthy, and highly processed foods, which are extremely unhealthy. So do you want me to explain the four groups?
So yeah, just one moment. So NOVA then, are they the goodies or the baddies?
Well, the NOVA is just the classification. It's four groups of processed food. So it's simply a classification.
So it's to help people understand then the different classifications.
It's really to demark the fact that now we've suddenly gone from processed foods that we would normally call processed foods to ultra high processed foods, which I'll come on to the difference, because there is a really big difference. And actually what explains it is the four groups. So if I explain the four groups, it will make a bit more
Let's
sense.
do that then, Jane. Thank you.
Okay, so group one is unprocessed or very, very minimally processed. So that would be things like pasteurizing milk or removing bits of meat that don't work properly. It would be these hazelnuts. They're unprocessed. They're simply just nuts. And it could also be freezing. Could be freezing peas. Okay, so that's minimally or very unprocessed food. That's group one. Group two is processed culinary ingredients. So that could be something like refining of flour or sugar, which of course makes it less healthy. It could be the milling or grinding of nuts. So my ground almonds here are in that second group. So they're very minimally processed because they've been ground. And then group three is processed foods. So this can be more 2 or 3 types of ingredients. They're often combinations of group one and group two foods. And they can just increase the durability of the food, or they can enhance the sensory quality of the food. So for example, if you're adding salt to cabbage to make sauerkraut, that could be classed as that. It could also be bread, could be in this category if it's quite simply processed breads. For example, just wheat flour, salt, what's the other thing? Yeast. That's it. And yeast. Yeah, so that could be classed as that. And also it could be things like curing meats or canning fruit in syrup. So they are processed, but they're sort of minimally-ish processed. They don't have lots of additives to it. They're just having 1 or 2 things done to it.
Would you say that a can of baked beans is a minimally processed food?
It depends on the ingredients of it. Do you want to read out the ingredients on the back?
Well, I tell you why I ask. I've got 2 cans here of baked beans, and one is a Marks and Spencer's baked beans, and one is a Sainsbury's organic one. But there are fewer ingredients in the M&S cheaper one than in the Sainsbury's organic one. So, so quickly then. Right, ingredients in the M&S one, and instead these are 55 pence a tin, because I think the price of baked beans at the moment is just horrendous. Right, haricot beans 49 pence, tomatoes 33%, water, sugar, corn flour, salt, vinegar, dried onion, paprika, paprika extract, onion oil, garlic extract.
Okay, that's probably a group 3 because it's got a few additives, but there's not any sort of emulsifiers or colorings or flavorings in them.
No, that's right. And there are no colorings or flavorings in the Sainsbury's organic one either. Well, there's acidity regulator in the organic one that's not in the Marks and Spencer's one. Citric acid and malic acid.
Yeah.
But they put those into as a preservative, a natural preservative. Yeah. Right. Okay. Great.
Okay. So
that's the third classification.
Yeah. So the fourth group is the ultra high processed group, and this is kind of like the new level of junk food effectively. And this is where you get ingredients that are generally not found in domestic kitchens. They're things that your granny wouldn't recognize. They're things that you can't pronounce. They're usually chemicals. And to give you an example, bread I mentioned before can be a group 3 processed food because it's just made with wheat flour, salt and yeast. A bread that is, I don't know, let's take a gluten-free bread where you've taken the gluten out and you put lots and lots of additives, emulsifiers, flavorings, colorings, numbers, etc. That makes it highly processed.
That's your shop bought, like supermarket mass-produced type bread.
It is pretty much your mass-produced type bread, yeah, as opposed to your nice sort of sourdough, organic loaf or something that you get from a bakery.
Yes. So ultra-high processed food category 4 contain ingredients that have been manufactured in a laboratory, basically.
Yes, exactly that.
Okay, right. We'll come on a bit more to ultra-high processed foods. Well, yes, next actually. What is the prevalence of ultra-high processed foods in the UK?
Well, do you know, I looked this up ready for this talk and I was actually quite shocked about it. It's believed that 50 to 60% of our daily energy intake come from ultra-processed foods. Really? I just think that's so high. And it's also believed, there were some figures here on an article that I read, we consume 8 kilograms a year of chemical additives. That's 18 pounds.
That can't be good for us, Jane. That cannot be good for the human organism.
It certainly can't. I mean, I'm really shocked at that statistic, I have to say. I mean, I know that they have increased massively recently, but I'm still shocked by that.
Because the immune system will just not be recognising those ingredients.
Exactly that. Yeah, I'll come on to that later. The body just doesn't recognise it. Yeah.
Okay, so what are common additives added to ultra-high processed foods? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, in the journal Nature in 2020, the last count was that 330 different chemicals were approved for use in food manufacture. 330.
Is that in the UK?
I don't know, actually. I'm assuming that's probably global because a lot of it will be quite similar that are used around. But even so, 330 chemical additives approved for use in food manufacturing is huge. So I'll just go through some of the basic ones and just give one example because there's so many to give. Okay. So preservatives are very commonly found in things. You can have potassium nitrite that helps to keep meat fresh. You can have sodium nitrate, which helps to make your meat look pink. And then acids that you mentioned before, citric acid, malic acid, acetic acid, they're all acids as well. So they're all preservatives.
But sorry, Jane, but can they be harmless preservatives and harmful ones?
Yeah, they can. So you can have natural ones and you can have synthetic ones, and the difference in them is quite significant in lots of the categories. So for example, the citric acid, the acetic acid, the ascorbic acid, they're all relatively natural. So they're not so bad. So I think you mentioned that those were in the baked beans, and you quite often find that as an acidity regulator when you have tomatoes. Yes. So that's not too bad as long as you're not having it all the time.
Yes.
But colorings, this is more interesting because colorings, so let me give an example of one called sulfite ammonia caramel, and that's to make things look caramelly, so it can be beer or tea or desserts. And usually when colorings are used, they're often to subsil substandard quality food. So they're basically just colouring it where there is no colour, which is awful.
Just making it look more attractive.
They're making it look more attractive. Now, you can get natural colouring, so you can get anthocyanins, which are blues, and then you can get, what's the other one? Carotenes, which are orange. So they're natural. However, the synthetic colours are much cheaper and they are much more efficient. They basically colour things better, so they have to use less of it. So, of course, that is far more used in food manufacturers, sadly. But good brands, you will notice, will tend to use more of the natural colorings or flavorings or preservatives. As you start to look at them, you can start to sort of see a pattern. So that's colorings, that's a biggie. And then there's flavorings. So you can have natural flavoring. So for example, you can have orange natural flavoring that might have come from an orange essential oil or something. But then you've got things like MSG, monosodium glutamate, which is a flavor enhancer that's found in lots of ready meals, but also found in lots of Chinese takeaways.
Yes, with common symptoms of headache and fatigue. and nausea. Yes.
And monosodium glutamate, has lots of issues with it. And then emulsifiers, there's emulsifiers, which I'll come on to talk about in a bit more, but there's one that's called mono and diglycerides of fatty acids, a very catchy name, which is often found in bread or frozen meals or mayonnaise. And then there's artificial sweeteners. Sucralose is an example, obviously found in anything sweet, so breakfast bars or cereals or soft drinks commonly. So preservatives, colorings, flavorings, emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, they're the main ones that we tend to see in there. And there is a French project that's going on. It's called the Nutrinet Santé project, and it's about 500,000 people they're following. And they follow them up with blood, stool and urine tests, I think. And they're investigating the difference between nutrition and health relationships. And one of the epidemiologists based on, I'm going to quote him exactly because I think this is a really great quote. The cocktail effects of all these additives have also never been investigated. They may generate a health effect that doesn't happen when the additives are used individually.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So not only do we not know if you have a cocktail of those 330 across all of your foods, what I add to that is that we don't know the cumulative effect of all of those chemicals, plus what's in your environment, plus what's in your household, plus what's in your toiletries and your skincare.
I know. Yes.
So there's just so many.
Just being bombarded. On this Word doc that you sent to me, Jane, it kind of jumped off the page at me, actually. Basic principle of toxicology is that the dose makes the poison. So not just the dose, but the combination of doses makes the poison.
Absolutely. It's a well-known phrase in toxicology, and it's absolutely, which is why, and I will give some tips later on, why we need to just look at all areas that we have these things that are sneaking into our life, because they're not just coming in through your food, they're coming in through your skin, they're coming in through your environment, your nose, your lungs. So we need to be looking at them all and making a big effort to reduce them.
I suppose when it comes to environment, Jane, there's not a lot we can do about that, is there, really? You know, are you talking about when we're kind of out and about in the community, or are you talking about when we're in our own homes, offices, whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. It could be a bit of both. So it could be something, for example, like using plug-in air fresheners, or using Febreze sprays, or any of those unnatural sprays. You know, all of those sorts of things. So yes, there's certain ones in the environment that we can't control, but you certainly can control lots around your household, for sure. And just spraying lots of so many smells and fragrances are added to things these days that we really don't need. I mean, everything I have in my house just has essential oils in.
I just remember the adverts, the commercials on the television, although I've not seen them for several months now because we don't have a TV license, we don't watch television. But when we did, adverts were like Shake and Vac and Febreze.
Yeah,
I thought, why don't you just open a window?
I'm totally with you on that one.
Okay, so so why are these additives harmful? I suppose in small doses they're not harmful, are they, Jane?
Again, it's the dose is the poison.
It's the dose,
as you mentioned, and it's understood that the body just struggles because it doesn't recognize them. You know, anything that the body recognizes that we've had around for years and centuries, the body recognizes. But anything that's effectively made in a laboratory in the last, I don't know, 10, 20, 50 years, it's foreign to it. You know, it's foreign to it. So the body struggles to recognize it, and then can lead to inflammation. And we already know that inflammation is linked to things like obesity and cancer and type 2 diabetes.
And people aren't just being exposed to one or two of these additives. They're being exposed to dozens and dozens, maybe on a daily basis, if they're eating a lot of ultra high processed food.
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody is having going out every day and having a sandwich from a cafe or something, which is still very processed, or they're having a ready meal, or they're having a takeaway, or they're having fizzy drinks on tap, you can easily get up to 4 or 5 servings a day. easily.
Yeah, maybe they're having a pizza for the tea that's got processed meat on it as well. Yeah.
It actually doesn't take much when you look at
Mm.
what's around in the supermarkets, and I'll come on to talk about supermarkets in a minute because
I think the most processed thing that Kevin and I eat would be a tin of beans or a tin of tomatoes. I mean, I picked up this tin of salmon, and this has just got wild Pacific red salmon in it. Oh, 99% salmon, yeah, and salt.
and 1% salt. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. That's a good processed food. Tin tomatoes are great processed food. Baked beans can be reasonable if they have. Most baked beans are actually okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. They're fine to have in your cupboard. They're good staples. They don't need to be completely banned from your diet.
Porridge.
Plain porridge oats, lovely.
Just 100% whole grain Scottish oats.
Yeah. So that'll
And
be all.
you can do so much with porridge oats, can't you, Jane? You don't just need to have them as a breakfast cereal. You can make flapjacks and all kinds of things from them, can't you?
You can. That's a good example actually, because nowadays you get all of the little sachets of oats that are ready to make. So they're being pre-processed to be ground down so that they're easier to cook. And they've normally added sweeteners and sugars to it.
Yes.
You don't need to. And then that makes that a highly processed, ultra processed food. And all it is porridge oats that you can add your own maple syrup to, or you can add your own.
My mum likes to buy those little pots from the supermarket, but when I look at the ingredients, I say, well, Mum, why don't you just make your own porridge?
Yeah, I know, it's so easy to make, isn't it?
So moving on then, Jane, yes, tell us more about emulsifiers. Why are they put into foods and what impact do they have on the gut, particularly in relation to inflammatory bowel disease?
So emulsifiers, what they do is they effectively mix oil and water, so they create a nice texture. So if you think about when you make a vinaigrette sauce with oil and vinegar, it separates, doesn't it? But of course, as it should do naturally. But in processed foods, they don't want that because it looks messy. So they want to combine it so it looks nice. So it's often used in creamy type things, in sauces, in bologneses, in mayonnaises, margarines, ice creams, etc. And you can, again, so here you can get natural ones and synthetic ones, again, like in most additives. So the natural ones is lecithin that comes from soy, and carrageenan that comes from algae. So they are the better forms, and in the better brands you'll find those emulsifiers there. And then synthetic ones are a different kettle of fish in my view. You can get mono and diglycerides of fatty acids. That's actually known as E471, which is an E number that you see a lot. And also polysorbates, they're also emulsifiers. And emulsifiers is a bit of a, well, we're not entirely sure what they're doing to our health at this stage. We believe that they contribute to gut disease development from a point of view that it disrupts the, I've got my window cleaner making a noise on disrupting. Typical timing, isn't it?
Emulsifiers, are they a relatively recent artificial ingredient?
I think they've been around quite a while, but they've become more prevalent in more and more foods now. Why emulsifiers can be problematic is that we believe that they disrupt the intestinal mucus layer, which is really, really important to keep our guts healthy. We believe also it affects the gut microbiome. We've found out so much more about the gut microbiome in the last 10, 15 years. We also believe that it might increase bacterial translocation, so where bacteria moves from one part of the body to another. So to increase inflammation. Now, I like to use the analogy of washing up liquid. For me, an emulsifier is like squirting washing up liquid into your gut. When you squirt washing up liquid into a bowl, it disperses the fat. That's what it's supposed to do. And that's effectively what it does, or we believe it does, to your mucus layer in your gut. So it's almost like cleaning your gut out when actually you want it to stay, with a nice mucus layer in your gut, which is very protective. So an
emulsifier begins to break down that protective mucosal layer that lines the gut.
Yeah, like washing up liquid does in a bowl of greasy washing up. It
Yep.
breaks through the fat layer. So that's kind of the analogy I like to use. The research is quite ongoing. I mean, there's evidence of harm in mice. In mice studies, they have found that it might potentially cause a leaky gut, hence inflammatory bowel disease, and inflammation and upsetting the microbiome. But we don't really know the continual use in humans. But there has been 2 studies, a UK one and a French one, that have both found similar outcomes, and that toxic bacteria may escape the gastrointestinal tract and then cause inflammation throughout the body. And then they've also felt that it has disrupted the microbiome. And then they've also put down, both the French and the UK studies, both put theories potentially for heart disease, diabetes, and Crohn's disease.
Well, all of which are driven by inflammation, aren't they?
Exactly. That's exactly the mechanism. Yeah.
And I suppose also it depends. There are lots of variable factors involved. Genetics probably comes into it as well. The kind of the cards that you were dealt when you were from your relatives, and what else you're doing as well. Alcohol, smoking, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. If you've got some genetic SNPs on your liver detoxification enzymes, then you are going to struggle much more to clear all of these things. So I myself have a double deletion, which means I have 2 enzymes that are completely absent. So my detox capacity is much, much reduced. So I have to work much, much harder. I can't tolerate alcohol. I can't tolerate caffeine. So I have to work much harder to clear things.
How did you find that out then? Did you have a test?
Yeah, genetic testing. Yeah.
Oh, a genetic test.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I'm trained in genetic training as well, so I do it quite often with clients. It really does help to see if someone struggles to detoxify, and then we have to work harder on things like any products going in foods or skincare or household toiletries. Yeah.
So is that just primarily for the liver, or is the genetic testing for the stomach, the gut, the pancreas?
Yeah, it doesn't. Yes, so for example, it can test your propensity for inflammation. It can detect your propensity for bone health, for how you methylate in your body, oxidative stress. Yeah, so it covers a wide range of health conditions. It's a very useful test to do because you only do it once because your genes don't change. And then you've got that information for life. Yeah.
Okay, right. Thank you for that. So moving on then, why is sugar, salt and fat addictive? What's happening with the brain that we seem to want food that is bad for us?
Yeah, that bliss point. So ultra high processed foods contain 8 times more sugar than even processed foods. So that's the difference between effectively group 3 and group 4. So that's quite shocking, really, isn't it? And of course, the more sugar in those processed food, the more that's going to link to increased blood pressure, increased triglycerides, blood glucose, fasting insulin, all of those metabolic markers. Now, the bliss point I just mentioned, this is sneaky. This is the manufacturers that basically want to get you addicted because it sells. It sells. And the addiction is based on the taste and the texture sensation. And they will put in whatever additives and chemicals they need to make the taste perfect, the look perfect, and the texture perfect. And that's called the bliss point.
Did they come up with that phrase, the bliss point? The manufacturer?
I don't know. I really don't know where the phrase came from, but it's a well-known phrase in nutrition. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling through my phone because I wanted to. I mean, you'll probably know anyway. Like sort of back in the 1950s, only around 1% of the UK population were clinically obese. And now that figure is moving up to almost 30%. That's clinically obese. That doesn't include people who are obese or overweight.
Overweight, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so, sugar, salt and fat obviously is implicated in obesity.
Yes, it is.
And type 2 diabetes and cancer.
And anything inflammation driven, which is basically any types of autoimmunity, cancer. Yeah, absolutely.
So in ultra high processed food, quite apart from the fact that this food has got lots of artificial additives in that have been manufactured in a laboratory, they've also got too much sugar, salt, and fat, cheap sugar, salt, and fat in them.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It is. It's refined sugar, so it won't be, coconut sugar or Himalayan salt or any of the sort of the healthier versions of sugar or salt. Um, they are they're just packed with it. Any highly processed food. You take let's take an example of a cake, a processed cake, and you will find sugar in lots of different forms, which I'll talk about later. You'll find far too much salt. You'll find emulsifiers, probably colorings to cover up the cheap ingredients to make it look like it's, particularly things like butter. Exactly, they'll often put colorings in just to make it look prettier. So yeah, it's the difference between the group 3 process, which we've had around for quite a long time, as you say, your can of baked beans, to your ultra high processed food, which is food that effectively doesn't resemble what it started out life like.
Oh yes, yeah, these beans do have sugar in, but it doesn't say how much. It doesn't say how much sugar.
Where is it in the ingredients list? How many down from the top
Yeah,
is it?
I'm just looking for that, Jane, and I can't see it on. I can't see it on this can of Marks and Spencer's baked beans.
Oh,
It's not been broken down. It should be, shouldn't it?
yes, it should be.
I mean, it's the law, isn't it, that it should have that table on.
Yeah, it just might be on a different part of the tin that you're not looking at.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay, it's in French. I don't know why it's in French. So let's sugars. 4.1 grams of sugar per 100 grams.
Yeah, okay, that's not too. Yeah,
It's not
that's not
too
too
bad,
bad.
is it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's quite a lot for beans, but because of the acidity of tomato, that's why they tend to put
Yes.
sugar in.
Well, we may have a tin of beans once a month. I don't know how they've been in the cupboard for months and months. They have. Right. So, what can you tell us about high fructose corn syrup? What foods can we find it in, and why is it bad for us?
Well, this is luckily, it's mainly a United States issue.
Yeah. Yes.
It's made from genetically modified corn. It's an
Has
artificial.
it been banned in this country?
Ah, I'm coming on to that.
Okay.
It's an artificial sweetener and it has sweet foods. Now, it is not banned in the UK, but it's not used routinely.
Okay.
Okay. So, what we have here is usually glucose fructose syrup or fructose glucose syrup. Now, depending on which way round it is, it depends. So if it's glucose fructose syrup, it has slightly more glucose than fructose. If it's fructose glucose syrup, it has slightly more fructose.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
fructose is and there's quite a lot of UK biscuit makers that have this brand, so you do have to be careful. But why fructose is so much the problem, because in the high fructose corn syrup, is it adds too much fructose to your diet and your liver struggles to cope with the fructose because it's quite toxic and increases the risk of fatty liver disease as well, which we've seen escalating levels of.
Yes. Yes.
Also increases obesity, particularly visceral fat. So that's the fat that sits around your organs, around your heart or your liver. Also increases diabetes and inflammation, and also links to pancreatic cancer as well. So, too much of this sweetener is nightmare. So that's why the obesity rates are so prevalent in the United States, because this is
Yeah.
used very widely. So it's
Yeah.
not so much a problem here, but do look out for glucose fructose syrup or fructose glucose.
Where might we find fructose syrup or so you're saying that high fructose corn syrup not so much in this country, but does that mean it is, and if so, where is it?
Yeah, it is, and quite a few biscuit manufacturers use it in the UK. So,
Okay.
but it won't be called high fructose corn syrup. It will be called glucose fructose or fructose glucose syrup. You
Right.
can't buy it on its own as an ingredient here, like you can in the States, but it is put in foods. So again, it's just checking some of the. I'm not going to name the manufacturer, but yeah, look them up. They're
And
quite well-known biscuit manufacturers. Let's just say.
okay, and if they do put it in, they have to put it on the they have to list it as an ingredient.
I believe so. I believe they have to, yeah.
Okay.
Gosh. But one thing that's interesting about sweeteners is that this is all about politics, because in 2016 they brought in a sugar tax, and the way to get around it was to put sweeteners in. So hence why the use of sweeteners and glucose fructose syrup increased massively in foods.
Right. Okay. Then I'm just trying to get my head around that. So they brought in the sugar tax.
Yeah,
So manufacturers wanted to find a way around that, so they didn't have to pay as much tax because they're always
exactly.
thinking about the figures on the balance
That's
sheet.
exactly it. Yes.
So they went down the sweetener route then.
Yeah.
But sweeteners are sugar.
They're not really. They're
Well,
artificial.
the chemical sugars.
They're chemical sugars. Yeah, they are. Yeah,
Right.
but
Ooh.
they're both problematic. Sugar is massively problematic, and
Mm,
so are artificial sweeteners. In
mm,
my view, I would prefer sugar over
mm.
artificial sweeteners any
Yeah,
day, because the
yeah,
body actually at least it's been recognizing it for hundreds of years, hasn't it? Sugar.
yeah, of
And
course,
let's,
yes.
we didn't have the obesity rates we had in the 1970s. You look at, there's lots of beach photos circulating, lots of social media about people in the 1970s on a beach, and that, there's not
You
a
can't help but notice, you can't help but make an observation, can you, Jane? The difference.
yeah.
And I think a lot of people just don't realise that it's what they're eating that's causing not just the weight gain, but other health issues that they may have. Just talking about sweeteners, so a natural low calorie sweetener then maybe that you want to put in your coffee or your tea is something like stevia.
Stevia is the exception because it's completely natural. It comes from a plant. It's extremely sweet. It's something like 100 times sweeter than sugar. I think it's
Yes.
something like that. So stevia, pure stevia, is absolutely fine to use. But stevia that's put into other things, I think there's a brand called Truvia that's got lots of other additives in it.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, pure stevia, fine. Again, in some of the better brands, you will find stevia as a sweetener. But generally, any of the others, which I will come on to talk about, no,
Yes,
they're best,
I,
best
I use
avoided in
I
my
use
view.
I have 1 cup of coffee a day, and it's my treat, and I make it with almond milk, and I just put one little click, from my of stevia in. Yes, and that's my treat every day. Right, where were we? Oh yes, okay. Are fizzy and artificially flavoured drinks really that bad for us?
Well, a lot of the health issues I just explained before about the liver and obesity, they are the same whether they're fizzy or artificially flavored drinks, because it's the sweeteners that are coming into our diet. Now, again, like all the other additives, we have natural flavorings and synthetic flavorings. So we can have, for example, an orange flavoring, and an orange may have come from, let's just say, an extracted dehydrated orange or something.
Yes.
But then you can have orange that comes from a lab that's never seen sight of an orange.
Mm,
So I do believe there is a specialist company that supplies flavorings to food manufacturers.
I'm
So
sure there is.
basically buy your pineapple off the shelf,
Yeah.
as a chemical that's never seen sight of a pineapple. So yes, I'm always pretty aware of these sorts of things. The other things about flavored drinks, obviously the sugars or the artificial sweeteners, is also the phosphoric acid.
Mm,
So this is used as a flavor enhancer in fizzy drinks, and
mm,
it's believed it can help to leach calcium out of the bones, so
mm,
therefore
mm.
put you at risk of osteoporosis. So
Yeah.
I really, really hate to see teenagers or younger children even drinking lots of canned drinks, because I
I
just think
know.
that you lay down your bone density by the age of 19.
Mm,
And if
mm,
you're constantly drinking these, particularly drinking the Coke Zero or the Diet Coke, thinking that it's doing you better,
mm, mm.
it's
And when you're walking around the supermarket and you're seeing, people's trolleys with 2 or 3 2-litre bottles of
yeah,
a
yeah.
well-named fizzy drink brand.
Yeah, and also dental health. Obviously, fizzy drinks are a problem for dental health. So if they're made with sweeteners, they're not so problematic for dental health. You've just got more of the problems with the liver. But if they're made with sugar, you've got the dental health issues. So
I mean, the dental health of the country is shocking, you know, Jane. More and more young children are having to go to hospital to have teeth
yes,
extracted
yes,
because
yeah,
of decay.
that's
And you
exactly
know that's diet related, isn't it?
yeah.
So did we cover this? What are artificial? Why are artificial sweeteners harmful, and where will we find them? Did we cover
We were
this?
just starting to, but the
Oh,
body doesn't.
right.
You mentioned it before. The body doesn't recognise them really.
Yeah.
So again, natural, artificial, we've got the same as in all of these things. So the natural ones could be any of the sugars, so lactose, fructose,
Mm.
sucrose, maltose. They all end in O's because they're
Yeah.
sugar. But then the artificial ones are the problematic ones in my view. So that's saccharin, aspartame, and acesulfame K. Um,
Yes.
they're not found in nature. No, aspartame has been linked to neurological damage in young children,
Mm.
believed to be quite toxic to the organ. And there's also concerns with embryonic development as well. So
I was
development.
just thinking that, Jane. So, you know, women who are pregnant, if they're eating a lot of ultra high processed food, a lot of artificial additives, cheap fat, sugar, and what was the other one? Fat, sugar, and
Salt.
salt. Yes, yeah. Surely it's going to, there's a higher risk of it impacting the fetus. The
Yeah,
growth.
without a shadow of a doubt, there's quite a lot of research on it. And what the artificial things do is they confuse the body. So sugar will say, okay, there's some sugar coming. I'm going to deliver some calories. And the body goes, okay, I'm waiting for it. And then the calories get delivered and the glucose goes to the brain and you can think clearly or you can mobilize your muscles to run away. We've been doing that for centuries.
Mm.
But an artificial sweetener, it says, okay, right, there's some sugar coming. And then no sugar gets delivered because it's 0 calories. And the body's going, well, what's going on? What's going on? And it gets really confused.
Mm.
So they're just so confusing for the body. I would always choose, I don't choose sugar very often, but I would always choose sugar over artificial sweeteners because sugar's been around for centuries. Yes, we know it rots teeth. We know it causes problems, but we know the body at least can it can handle it in small amounts. It can't handle it in large amounts, hence what leads us to diabetes.
Sometimes if I want to really give myself a treat, like I say, I'll have 1 cup of coffee a day made with almond milk and I'll put my little stevia in. But sometimes instead I will just put a La Perouche sugar cube in, brown sugar, French. It's a French brand, La Perouche of sugar, and it's lovely, and that's a treat as well. Right, okay. Can you give us some research data that links processed food to ill health?
Yeah, I don't think there's really any doubt that it leads to ill health. But when you look at the studies, there's a French study that's been 100,000 people that they found that the higher use of processed food led to heart disease and strokes, so particularly heart related. And actually, for every 10% increased use of the UPFs, that's ultra processed foods as we call them, there's between an 11 to 13% increased risk of those diseases.
Right, okay then. So how are the food manufacturers fighting back? Have they got people doing their own research, or do they just ignore the data?
I think there's always that to consider. You always have to look at who funds the studies,
Yes.
whether studies were funded and then they weren't published because they didn't get the outcome that they wanted. If we lived in a world where every study had to be published when it was started, we would have a very different set of data out there.
We would. And was it Dr. Malcolm, oh, the doctor who wrote Doctor in Data?
Kendrick?
Yeah, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, he wrote that. I've got it somewhere. It's in the Doctor in Data, and he writes a lot about yes, about how certain, well, not just food companies. I think it's pharmaceutical companies as well. How they
yeah, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yes,
and there's also a review that was done in India, came out of India and Yemen, which also linked some further things as well as the heart. It linked asthma, ADHD, cancer, obesity, and further growth and development. So there's lots more that's also associated with use. And in fact, that particular paper looked at the toxicological effects, so how toxic these additives are, but they looked at the teratogenic effects, which is how it affects, so exposure in pregnancy, and therefore how it affects the unborn child.
Have you come across the Pottinger cats experiment, Jane?
No.
The Pottinger cats experiment. It was something I learned almost 30 years ago when I started my journey into natural health. An American study, it's quite old, I think it goes back to the 1940s actually, where a researcher, he got some cats and he split them into two groups, and he fed one group healthy food, healthy cat food, and the other group, and we're going back to the 1940s here, when there was much less processed food actually. And he fed the other group processed food, and too much fat, sugar and salt. And then these two groups of cats had kittens, and then he carried on with that experiment, and he found that with each progeny that was born of the two groups, the groups that were given the processed food, they got sicker and sicker.
I think it does come down generations for sure. And
Exactly.
I think that's what we're starting to see already, actually.
Yes. And where children are dying before their parents because,
Yes, there's an increased amount of that for sure. And this French study I talked about, which is 500,000 people they're following, it's an ongoing one. They're following, and they do blood, urine, and feces markers. That's right, because they're looking at how the microbiome is affected. And it's mentioned in there that in France now it's become quite normal. And my sister lives in France, so I've been going to France for decades. And when I used to go there 20 years ago, there was hardly any processed foods in the supermarkets. There was aisles of cheese, aisles of ham, aisles of red wine, aisles of baguettes, aisles of salad, but there was hardly any processed food. I was there at Christmas, and it's just shocking the amount. It's just like in the UK now. So even the French, who are particularly known for good food, they have fallen foul of
well,
the.
Jane, I blame corrupt politicians and all the lobbying that goes on, and having their palms crossed with silver.
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, yeah, we could talk about that till the cows come home, but there's a lot of corruption in big food. Yeah, for sure. And the other thing I want to say about the research that links that processed food to ill health is also on behavior, hyperactive behavior. So colorings, particularly for children. So tartrazine and sunset yellow are two very known ones that can cause hyperactivity in children. Tartrazine, yeah.
So what kind of foods would you find that in?
Well, usually things like bright coloured sweets that have got bright colours. But you find, I think you find fewer of them. I think, for example, Smarties used to have them all in and don't have them anymore, I believe. I think they now use natural colourings, because they used to be bright turquoise and bright orange, didn't they? But I don't know. I'm not.
Yes, they did, didn't they? The colours look, because we sometimes buy Smarties for Jessie, my granddaughter, and the colours do look a bit more subdued. You don't need to wear your sunglasses now when you look at them.
Exactly, and I think that's because they're using natural ones. Yeah, do check on there. Actually, that would be quite an interesting.
I will.
But an Australian study was also linking processed foods to ill health, particularly to obesity. But they were also talking about the hypothesis, which is called the protein leverage hypothesis, which is really interesting. And this has been quite prevalent in nutrition worlds recently. And because of the higher consumption of ultra-processed foods, it means that protein is being diluted, because ultra-processed foods are primarily carbohydratey, full of fat and full of salt. And what it's saying is that what the hypothesis is that our bodies eat to satisfy a protein target. And if we don't have enough protein in the first meal of the day, we are more likely to overeat later on in the day to try and satisfy that target. So to give you an example, take a steak. A steak is 100 grams. 100 gram steak is 25 grams of protein. So if you eat that, you're going to feel quite nicely full up. If you have 100 grams of lentils, you equally get 25 grams of protein. So again, you're going to feel quite nice and full up. If you have bread, 100 grams of bread, you're only going to get 12 grams of protein, so half the protein of the other two. And then if you eat 100 grams of crisps, you're only going to get almost half again, 7 grams of protein. So therefore, you're going to eat 2 to 3 times more of that bread and those crisps to try and get to your protein target. And that's what leads to obesity.
Yeah, so it's very important to always have protein, the right protein for breakfast.
The right protein, yes.
I'm just going to shut my window, Jane, because my neighbour has just started playing music in the garden. Can you hear it? Can you hear it?
I can't. No, you probably didn't hear my window cleaner either.
That's better. Right, okay, thank you very much for that. I just want to say, if you've just joined us, I'm Linda from Just for Tummies, and this is Jane Barret, nutritional therapist, and we're talking about food and ultra high processed food and artificial additives, and how they're making people fat and sick, basically. Right, so what about vegan and vegetarian processed foods too? Several studies show the beneficial effect of a vegan vegetarian diet because, you know, they tend to eat more vegetables and pulses, but surely the increased prevalence of vegan vegetarian junk food is a worry too.
Yes, it is. So vegan, vegetarian or gluten-free food, they are worse than the original counterparts of, unfortunately, because they usually are nothing like they started out in life. So for example, let's take a vegan sausage. It's usually made from processed soya. It could have even been genetically modified soya. And the final sausage looks nothing like a soybean in the first place. So it's completely changed. It's had.
Sorry, do they have to put on the packaging if it was made from genetically modified XYZ?
We don't generally have so much of a problem with the genetically modified in the UK as they do the US. You can pretty much assume that if you're having soya or corn in the US, it's genetically modified, but here it's less likely to be. But the only way around that is to buy organic, and then you can be sure that it hasn't been.
Yes, yeah, okay, yes. Right, so can you give any other examples of vegan vegetarian junk food?
Yeah, so anything that's basically trying to be like meat. So meat sausages, meat burgers, anything that is trying to be something that it isn't effectively. The best thing that we can do if anyone is vegan, vegetarian or gluten-free is to eat as naturally vegan, naturally vegetarian, naturally gluten-free as you can. So avoiding the substitute foods effectively, because that's where we're going to find the ultra high processing.
Because there are some delicious vegan and vegetarian foods out there. You know, we have a couple of vegan restaurants in Nottingham, and the food's absolutely delicious.
Yeah, absolutely, it can be, but it's actually quite harder to be healthy when you're vegan because there's much more preparation involved. So, you know, putting a piece of chicken in the oven is reasonably quick. But when you're trying to create something to make sure you've got enough protein from a vegan point of view, you usually have to be a bit more creative with your tofu or your nuts or your lentils.
Yes, okay. Right. So yeah, we've talked about fat, but can you explain what hydrogenated oils are and why are they bad for us? And can you give some examples where we might find them? Funnily enough, I had an email from a lady yesterday who wanted to know, you know, cooking fats, cooking oils, the good ones and the bad ones. Yeah. And I said, watch the video tomorrow.
Yeah, I get that. I get that asked a lot, but that's another whole video. But what hydrogen does, it turns liquid oils into fat or solid or spreadable oils. So it kind of changes the aspect of it, and it's normally found in spreads, so sort of margarine type spreads, and butters, biscuits, donuts, typically sweet carbohydrate foods. But partially hydrogenated oil is much more of a problem because it's completely changed the structure of the oil and it effectively turns it into a trans fat. And we know that that's linked to heart disease, strokes, etc. And much more actually liver dysfunction, Alzheimer's, diabetes, you know, all of those things. And effectively, it's cheap, it extends the shelf life and it increases stability. So again, it's just another way of making things very convenient for food manufacturers. And there's no UK ban, so no UK ban here, but the government do urge reduction. But one thing I will say is trans fats are notorious in fast food chains.
Oh yes, yeah.
Of course, you don't get any labels before you get your food. You can't sit there and read your labels. If you were to read the label of what you're about to eat, you'd be shocked.
Mm. Mm. Well, we tend to use
Lovely.
and olive oil.
Yeah.
And butter sometimes. Oh, talking about butter, both Kevin and I, we're both fans of President butter, French butter,
Yeah,
the spreadable one as well. But they put cream in it to make it spreadable.
That's interesting, because usually to make it spreadable, they tend to put rapeseed oil in it, which is not the best oil. Yeah.
They put cream in it.
Yeah. It's better to buy the blocks if you can, because then it's
I know. We buy both, actually. We do buy both.
And then if you want it to be spreadable, you just leave it out in a butter dish at room temperature. Hey ho, it's spreadable.
I know. Right, okay then. So can you just mention a few bad oils then, that smoke points, just briefly? What are smoke points?
Well, smoke point is when the fat can turn from effectively a safe fat to an unsafe fat.
Yes.
Because it can change the molecular structure. So it's a big subject, but the short answer is use saturated fats for cooking, which will be coconut oil, which will be butter, which will be ghee.
Yes.
Avocado oil also has a good high smoke point. That's a good one. And olive oil, okay, but just be a bit careful, because it up to about 180 degrees or so, it's maybe a bit higher, it's safe. Okay. But keeping away from the sunflower, the safflower, the rapeseed oils.
Yes, okay, that's great, thank you. Oh yes, what do you know about glyphosate? As far as I'm aware, it's still being used by some UK farmers on crops, and local authorities who are spraying it in parks used by children to kill the weeds.
Yeah, it's the most commonly used pesticide globally.
And I thought it was banned in the UK.
No. So interestingly, well, I'll come on to that. It's increased dramatically in the last 20 years, basically due to its frequent use of what's called Roundup ready crops. So basically normally soya and corn. But interestingly, the EU banned it in December just gone. But because we are coming out of the EU, it's now legal to use here till 2025.
Okay, and do we know what the government are going to do post 2025? I suppose it depends what government we have in.
In theory, it's going to be illegal then. But interestingly, 2025, if you go back 10 years, in 2015, the World Health Organization then, and I quote, glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans. So it's taking 10 years to make that illegal. And it's linked with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma specifically.
So my Weetabix, I like Weetabix. It's organic, and I buy that because I know that the wheat has not been sprayed with glyphosate.
Yeah.
Whereas the normal Weetabix probably has.
It could well have been.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, it could well have been.
Right, great, thank you. So we've talked a lot about harmful ingredients in food, and our supermarkets seem to be swamped with Frankenstein fake food. But what should people be looking for in processed food?
Oh, that's a great question. They are aggressively marketed. You're not going to see anyone market an apple, are you? Saying, come and have your apple every day, but they're going to market your Cheerios or whatever. So the 3 key tips is to look at the back of the packet. So number 1, the ingredients that are higher up the list are going to be the higher in quantity.
Yes.
So they're going to be the greater amount. So one thing I tend to always say to people is, if it's got the first ingredient is sugar, then just don't even consider it, because it's going to be probably 40% sugar or something. So just don't even go there. However, tip number 2 takes that a bit further, because manufacturers are dead sneaky, and they know that you're going, oh, it's got sugar in the first 2 ingredients, I'm going to put that back. So what they do is they separate out those sugars. So they call it sugar, fructose, glucose, maltose, syrups, honey, molasses, fruit juice, maple syrup. They're going to split it out so that if you actually put all of those together, sugar would no doubt be the number 1 ingredient. So they're very clever. So you have to look for all the sugars throughout. They do the same with salt as well. So they'll call it salt or sodium or MSG or disodium phosphate. There's several other names for salt. So again, they're going to separate it out. So you do have to sort of read those things. And then the third tip for looking at processed food is if it's unpronounceable or it's not something that you've got in your kitchen, be very wary. Because I don't have any disodium phosphate in my cupboards. I don't have any fatty mono and diglycerides or fatty acids in my cupboard. I don't have any.
They belong in a laboratory.
Exactly. So if you've got lots of those in there and you can't pronounce it, again, just be very wary.
Just out of interest, Jane, I know some nutritional therapists, to help people with their diets and to understand, how dangerous these ultra high processed foods and additives are. They will go into people's homes, into their kitchens, and they will sort out all their cupboards and their fridge and just, throw everything out that shouldn't be in there and then help them put in what should be there. Do you offer? I'm sure you're far too busy.
I did actually, when I first started out, I did offer that, and nobody ever wanted it to be done. Really? So, yeah, I think people find that a bit, I don't know, maybe they find that a bit intrusive, you going in and lobbing everything out of their cupboard.
Oh, I thought it would be really popular actually. Or people just don't want to get rid of their the foods that they're addicted to. Who knows?
I don't know, but it is certainly. I don't know many of my colleagues that do that. I don't think it's.
Okay, I just wondered. Right. So, any other tips, or have we done with that one, Jane?
No, that one's done.
Right. So, we all know it's best to prepare food from scratch, but it's not always practical. Any tips?
Yeah, so if we revert back to the NOVA system of processing again, not all processed food is bad for you.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's just fine. The difference between the group 1s to 3, which are fine, and the group 4s, which are not so. So I'm going to use humus as an example because it's a really good example. So humus has chickpeas, tahini, garlic, olive oil, maybe paprika and cumin, lemon juice usually, doesn't it? That's what humus has in it. Yes. So they're all ingredients you'd have in your cupboard. They're all just put together, and they're a boon for busy families, aren't they? I mean, I don't make my own humus. So that can be fantastic. So that's a really good example of a good processed food that you can have in your fridge. Let's take a ready meal as another example. Now, this ready meal might have, say, 20 plus ingredients, which is quite likely. It's usually got items that you don't recognize. It might have some numbers in it. It might have high levels of salt, fat, and sugar. Usually the traffic lights are going a bit mad on there. They've usually got a few reds, particularly in the salt, fat, and sometimes the sugar. If they're savoury and if they're sweet, they'll definitely be high in the sugar. And quite often that's been manipulated far beyond its original form. So I use the example of vegan sausages or I'm not just picking on vegan food, but any other food that are just far beyond what they originally were. So more tips that I would give to kind of finish on really is that where possible, try to choose something with under 5 ingredients. It's a good rule of thumb, but anything that is very lightly processed is generally going to be under 5 ingredients as a general sort of rule. Anything that's 10 plus ingredients, I just say kind of park back on the shelf. You can get some with 10 plus ingredients. They're actually all really good ones. For example, I had a nut roast the other day, had about 15 ingredients, but they were all things I had in my cupboard. So that would be an exception to being something quite good. But generally anything 10 plus and certainly 15, 20 plus is going to be ultra high processed. And then a third tip on that is that if you find lots of allergens in there, so particularly wheat and particularly milk, they're cheap fillers. So they are usually used just to sort of fill things cheaply. So if you look at the back of the packet and you see quite a few things in bold, which has to be there legally for the allergens, so that might be milk, wheat, it might be soya, it might be, well, they're the 3 main ones, to be honest, that are more used because
Yeah,
they're
egg as well. Egg's highlighted, isn't it?
egg is highlighted, but egg's rarely a problem when it's put in things, to be fair, whereas milk and
Yeah.
wheat are usually
I'm
just
just looking at this.
ah
Depends. I'm just looking at the ingredients actually, because sometimes Kevin and I will have one of these, you know, with some salad. Not very often, but yeah, steamed parboiled long grain rice at 66%, scrambled egg, free range egg, whole milk, water, rapeseed oil, corn flour, lemon juice, salt, spice, onion, toasted sesame oil, onion powder, salt, yeast extract, garlic powder, spice, dried garlic, chives.
yeah. So actually, that's not
That's it.
too bad, but it's only 66% rice, so all of the rest of those additives do add up to 40-something% or 30-something%. So
And you don't know if any of the ingredients have been genetically modified either.
well, you don't, and also because they've processed the rice, you don't know how much of the original nutrients in the rice has been lost in processing.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'm not so keen on those packs for is the additives of the normally sunflower oil or rapeseed oil.
I know. Yeah.
They're sneaking that into non-dairy milks these days. So any milk that's called barista type milk, you know, the trendy milk that you want to whisk and make a
Yeah.
latte with it,
Yeah.
they've usually got rapeseed oil
I've
added.
stopped buying it, Jane. I've
Yeah,
stopped. I used to buy it, but I've stopped buying it, and I'm just on plain almond milk now.
yeah, just plain. And if you want to make that, you can always add your own fat into it. You can always add your own bit of avocado oil or coconut oil into something if you want to make that.
That's true. I never thought about that actually.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Jane, we've just gone 5 minutes over time.
That's not
Huge thanks to you for giving us your time. We love having you on our videos because you're so knowledgeable. Now, if people want to contact you, Jane, how do they contact you? What's your business name called? And I know you have lots of free resources on your website as well. So just run through some of the free resources that you have.
okay. So my website is nurturingnutrition.co.uk. Everything you want to know is found on there. I've got lots of free resources, free downloads. I have got free a podcast to listen to. I've got lots of recipes on the blog. There's lots of information on my website that you can find for sure. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Jane. So I'm going to wind up now, Jane, but don't disappear because I just want to grab you for 2 minutes at the end when we've stopped recording. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Right. So I just want to thank you all for watching. I hope you found that useful. And if you want to contact Jane, we'll put her details above this video. And thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye for now.